All right, so today's this month's workshop webinar, we're going to be doing some pretty basic bands. We're going to have some detail, give you some hints and things on how to build these, working with some different tools that you may not use or some different strategies, so we can add some detail to these kind of basic bands. And I'm going to just go ahead and jump right into 3DESIGN. We're using version 10.2. 10.2 is the latest and most stable. You should be on that. You can go over to 3design.com/update if you're not on the latest version. And we're just going to jump right in, start with a new part. And as always, a good habit is to save my document. So we'll do a save as. And I have a folder already here. There we go. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is to make things a little easier for me. I like to, for my stone layout, if I just create my cross section for my sweeping, for my band, and then lay out the stones, I might find that my stones don't kind of sit the way I want. So what I like to do is start with the stones, just to kind of lay them out the direction I want them, the angle that I want them at. That way I can just draw my cross section with that in mind. So I'm going to start there. Go over to the jeweler's bench, and we're going to click on stone. And that first stone always takes a little time to draw. Give that a second. There we go. And I'm just going to flip over to the front view so we can see. And we're going to set up the size of my stone. I'm going to put in some 2 pointers here. So 0.02 carat. And doesn't matter the color for now, so I'll just keep with the emeralds in there. That's going to be my center stone going down the middle of the pave, and I need one on either side. So I'm just going to select my move tool. Since these aren't going to be really stones, they're just kind of helping me with the layout. I'm just going to use my move tool to move it over, and we'll do a keep original. So we can quickly move it and make a copy without having to go into the clone tool. That way, when I double click back on here, I can go ahead and edit this, and using our new transform gizmo here with the move, rotate, and scale all built in, makes it really easy. I can just line this up, give it some rotation, and move it down. And that's kind of what I want. I want that kind of angle there. That way, when I draw my cross section, it's going to match that kind of angle and shape that I'm trying to go for. We'll validate that. And this one I'll just mirror over there. And that's in the duplicate section, second tool, mirror. You know that one by now. Okay, so that's going to be my pave layout, my 3 rows of pave that we're going to be creating. These are just temporary. Okay, I'm going to zoom out and select my OXZ plane and create a new sketch. And we'll draw our section. I'm just going to follow kind of, the shape of my stones here. Give myself some room for the prongs and just bring that down. Something like that. Okay, going to exit out of the sketch and unselect that. And for the ring size, obviously we're going to use a ring size builder that has all the built-in features, so we can parametrically link things to the ring size instead of drawing that in sketch mode where we know it's not going to be linked to anything in sketch mode. So this tool is going to help a lot with that. And we choose our finger size. I'm going to start with a size 8. It's a nice medium size to start from. And we don't really need the top plane. I'll leave it on there though. And we can choose our starting point. It's at the bottom by default. So for now, I'll leave that there. Okay. Now this is a very simple band, so we can do a very simple sweep here. And for single rail sweeps, I like to use the sweeping wizard. It gives you a lot more options, control over your sections. You can modify the sections shape, or not shape, but scale, rotation, etc. in there. So we'll just keep it very simple. Sweeping wizard. The sweeping wizard, you do need to choose how you're creating the ring. There is the custom ring where you can choose a sketch, or you can choose the ring size builder, or you can use ring creation mode where it will create the ring for you, or you can choose the builder here, plug that in. So to save even making sure that it's plugged in correctly, just like any other tool, if you pre-select the ring size builder, launch the sweeping wizard, it's going to pick the ring size builder as your custom rail. You're good to go. You don't have to worry about which one you're choosing. Sections, pop over to the sections tab. We're going to add our section list. Remember, in this one, we're not choosing the actual curve at this point. We're adding a generic section to the list. So we just hit add. We get section 1. It's just a little X marker there showing that we've added a section. So down here, you can choose your section either with the hand and physically grab the section, or you can use your library. So if you want to use something you've already drawn or one of the pre-drawn shapes in the library, you can pop right over the library. Since we're drawing our section today, I'm going to just grab that from the viewport here. Okay. Now, because it's already sized the way I want it, I don't really have to modify it. It should be good to go. So we can go ahead and validate that. I'll keep it on yellow gold, that's fine. And here's my band. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves here, I want to talk about setting ourselves up for certain things like our pave area that we're going to be paveing in. We're going to be adding some detail using 3Shaper for the little side pieces of the band, as well as some detail on the bottom. And for that, I want to look at the topology. The topology is, you've seen it in past versions when you do like a fillet or any tool that shows the surfaces and edges of your piece. So like copy faces, for example. You can see the edges and surfaces, how this is made up. And in V10, you can now just show that topology without having to launch a tool first, so it just stays on the screen. And we can do that by right-clicking an item and going to toggle topology display. So now you can see it's going to show that all the time until I turn it off again. Okay. If you haven't seen this new menu in here, you can also set different colors. So if you want to organize different parts by color, you can choose the color of that topology of your objects as well. We set that to gray for now. So looking at my design here, or the topology of my ring, we can see how the way I drew my curve is going to relate to that topology. I started with a symmetrical vertical curve to draw my shape, and that start point started over to the side a little bit because you can't really start in the middle because it would mirror on itself. So we get the edge of our surface here is where that start point is on our cross section. So everything's kind of off, to the side a bit. And let me go back in my sweep here real quick. I have a feature turned on I want to turn off. By default, this create single surface option is usually off. So if we take a look at the topology now, we have our start point where it's splitting it there, but we also have a split on the opposite corner. And that's because by default, it's splitting all surfaces in two. That used to be the only way to do it. Eventually, as Booleans got stronger and our tools got better, they decided to put this feature in where you can force it to do single surfaces. Used to be that it just always split them in half. So we'll take a look at that in a second here as well, that single surface option. So this is the default you'll see, every surface split in half, and it's based on the start point of your drawings. We take a look at the other split where the surface ends is where the start point is at the bottom of my ring. That's based on the start point of my ring size builder. It started at right here in the middle at the bottom. And again, because we don't have the single surface option on, we have the split at the opposite side. So we can control this and divide this up a little bit, because once I add my little side pieces, I want to be able to put some detail, some little texture down here at the bottom of the ring. And right now, if I try to do like a copy faces, I don't have a nice even area to cut out of there. So let's go back and redraw. I'm going to delete this sweeping wizard. I'm going to redraw this a little better so that we can control where those splits are. Okay, so I'm going to go back into sketch number 1 here. I like this shape, so I'm going to freeze it so I can kind of trace it a little bit without having it get in the way. So I'm going to go ahead and use my symmetrical vertical curve. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn off close curve. So that way, I'm going to start my design in my section here, right here at the bottom corner where I want the actual split of that surface to be. So we'll just kind of draw that. And then we still need a full cross section. So I'm going to grab another vertical curve, symmetrical vertical curve, turn off the closed curve again so it's open, and fill in the bottom section. So where these two end and start points meet up, that's going to give me a sharp point on my curve once I join these two together. Let's hide this original one. So we got two separate curves. I'm going to go ahead and select them and join them. You can do a join curves by selecting them, or you can just, because, well, I don't want to do an auto connect. It might get in the way because we've got that third curve back behind there. So in this case, I want to select exactly the two curves that I want to join and join them manually, just in case. So now I've got that sharp point in the start point area here, and then the one where it joined at this corner here. So sometimes we do want those sharp points. That's going to create those edges for us. Let's go ahead and go back and resweep this with our new section. I'm going to select my ring size builder, back to the jeweler's bench. We're going to do our sweeping wizard. For our section, we'll add a generic section and then just use the hand to grab my section, the new one that I drew. And again, very basic sweep. I don't need to do anything else. We'll go ahead and sweep that. And we'll turn on the topology display for this object. So now you can see clearly where it's splitting, exactly where those sharp points were. So it's going to split it here and here. We've got this nice simple surface on the inside. It is still splitting it in the start point of our what's the tool? Our ring size builder, because it's at the bottom and then splitting at the top. So we can fix that so that our start point is out of the way, because again, I want a nice, clean, simple single surface at the bottom of my ring. So first thing I'm gonna do is go back into my sweeping wizard, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn on that create a single surface option. Okay, so now you see we only have the split at the bottom. So that's still gonna be in the way. I'm gonna put that up here at the top. So in the ring size builder, remember we had the option to choose where the starting point is. So it's bottom by default, because a lot of times, we're not going to put any detail down at the bottom. We get out of the way. In this case, I am going to put some detail down there, and I don't want that split in the way. So we're going to put it at the top. We'll just validate, recompute this, and now we see the split here. So our ring is now made up of two surfaces, one clean surface on the inside, one clean surface on the outside. Once I add my pieces and cut this in half, and we'll have a nice, clean, simple surface to work from on the bottom. So I just wanted to point that out, talk about how you can control the topology of your pieces by taking care of how you draw the pieces, the sections, and using some of those options to choose how it's divided up, the single surface option, and then the choose where the starting point. You can do all this manually too. So if we're sweeping something else that's not the ring size builder, for example, you can take a curve and using the modify curve section or tool. It's going to be in the solid tools here, down here in the curve section, modify curves. It's a little bit hidden, but if you go into the tab where it says reverse direction, that's going to reverse the direction of your curves if you choose the reverse option. But you also have the change origin. That's going to give you an option of using a mathematical number 0 to 1. So if you want it right in the middle, you can change it to 0.5 or 0.25 or wherever you want to move it, or you can move it physically, just moving the start point anywhere you want. So that gives you another place you can control it. So I'm not going to do that now because I want to keep it just based on the original top one here. But keep that in mind too. If you want to change the start point, you can do it here with this modified tool. That way you don't have to mess up your curves in your sketch. Your sketch stays basic, simple. You do it here. This is going to give you a copy of the curve. Use that to sweep around instead of the original. So another way we can control it. If you haven't used the modified curves tool, there's a lot of stuff in there you can do in parametrically in the solid mode instead of doing it all in sketch. Keep in mind it's going to give you a copy of the curve. Use that instead of your original. to do your sweeps or lofts or whatever you're going to be using, construct types. Okay, so now we've got this divide the way we want. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my topology display for now. And we'll start doing our pave. I'm going to do the pave first because as I lay out my stones, it's going to help me determine where I'm going to place my little detail on the side of the ring here. So I'm going to go ahead and save real quick, just in case I want to come back to this before I do the pave. We'll go to the jeweler's bench and advanced pave, first one in the jeweling section here. I have my ring selected, so it's going to go ahead and detect that, and it will show the topology here as well. And we're going to choose our different rules for our pave. So the first thing we're going to do is look at frontiers and collisions. Remember, with frontiers and collisions, we can turn on handling collisions. This is going to give me snapping between the stones, so none of my stones are touching. I'm going to use the 0.2 millimeter. Let's go a little closer today, so our prongs aren't too big. We'll do a 0.1 millimeter in between each set of stones. I don't want to do an auto pave on this one because I haven't really defined an area. I could go in and draw a curve, project a curve, or any way you can get the curve onto the surface, any kind of surface curve, get that on the surface and then use that as an area. But I want to control my pave a little bit more, make it nice and clean, and tell it exactly where I want all the stones to go. Auto may not fill in those 3 rows exactly the way we want. So we're going to do it manually. So I'm going to use my collisions 0.1. I don't need frontiers because I'm not worried about any of the edges on my topology here getting in the way. So we'll go over to symmetry because it is a symmetrical pattern. I'm going to do a planar symmetry. And we'll do a plane list. I'm going to do the OYZ. That's the third plane. It's the one hidden here. That way I get the left to right symmetry. I could probably do the OXZ symmetry as well and just do this half, but I think I want to do just the left and right just to keep things a little simple. So I've got all my rules set up. We're ready to pave. Click on our list of positions tool. This is where you're going to do your manual pave, set up our positions. And I'm going to go ahead and set our settings for that first position before I start adding them to the list. So I know my stone size, we decided earlier we're going to do some 2-pointers. That happens to be the default. And everything else is fine. We're ready to start paving. So remember, to do pave, we're going to add them to the list. This is going to switch modes so that we're in add mode. So unlike other lists where you're going to hit plus and add something, hit plus and add something, once you hit plus here, you're in add mode. You're ready to start adding stones. The other hint, if you've watched my pave videos, you're going to click and drag so you can move these around as you're placing them. I just realized I do want that other symmetry, so I'm going to clear this from the list. In V10, I think V9, these are in here as well. Some of these buttons, the remove buttons are here in the list, so you can remove all, clear everything out. Oh, not when you're in add mode, sorry. Switch back to the move mode or the edit mode, and then you can clear that from the list. I'm gonna go back and add my other plane. I do want that because I want to be able to snap to that center line. Now, that's gonna be the OXZ. That's my 2 planes of symmetry. I like to show these. I'm gonna hide the OXY. I'm not using it in this case. And we're gonna show the OYZ. That way I can see the 2 symmetry lines. If I'm looking from the top here, that's where we're snapping to. Okay, so now we're gonna go back. I'm gonna add my positions. Accidentally changed my caret size here. There we go. Go in add mode. Now we can click, keep that mouse button held down, drag them into place. You'll see that it will snap to those symmetry lines if you have symmetry on. It's gonna make lining my stones up much easier. I'm just going to click and drag these in here. You can see it's snapping to the edge of the other stone with that 0.1 collision that I put in there, so they're not going to be touching. Turn this a little bit, so continue down the side. Oh, went a little far. Let me go back into the move mode and delete that one. I give myself room there where I'm going to put in my little detail. Let's lose this one as well. Move one. There we go. So that's as far down as I want to go. Okay, switch back to the add mode, and we'll put in my other row here. Okay, so with these little snaps and rules and things, we set up collisions, frontiers. You can get your paves done pretty quickly, especially these symmetrical patterns. Get in there. There we go. One more. All right, that one's a little off. So remember, if you make any mistakes, you can switch out of add mode back to the move mode, select that stone, and we'll fix that. So there we go. Very happy with that pave pattern. So I'm gonna go ahead and validate that. Okay. Now we can set our stones. I'm gonna get rid of these extra copies I made here. We don't need those anymore. But I've already got my stone created here. It stayed centered, so I can use that for my jeweling. Go ahead and select my pave positions and the stone, and we'll go over to jeweling. And nothing to change in here. I'm happy with the jeweling. We don't need to filter anything by color or anything, and we don't need to mess with the scaling. I wanted to scale to my circles, so that's good to go. Okay. Now we will notice that our stones are at the position with the girdles at 0. And that's where it was created down here, so that's where it's going to be on the surface of the piece. So we can change the height of these, sink it in or bring it up over the surface. We can do that in the stone, but I like to do that in the pave. So in V10, that's changed a little bit. So if you haven't done this since V10, let me show you here. If we go back under jeweling and its history, and we go into our advanced pave. So before you would have a button that said apply modifications to all, and that would apply anything change you made to all the stones. Well, in V10, you can now just choose stones from your list. You can do it here in the viewport as well. So if we want to do just those, I'm holding control, add those to the list. So instead of having to select all of them and then change the Z heights, what I'm going to do is just do a select all. So that's the new button that you see in the top of our list there for stones. That way now all of them are selected, I can apply those modifications. So you can do the Z height here with this shortcut button in the corner if you want to manually raise it up and down. If you want to just type it in, we'll just go over here to Z value. If I wanted these to be traditionally paved, where we're going to cut between the stones to create the beads, we would bring these below the surface a little bit. I'm going to do prongs, so we're going to raise these up above the surface a little. And I'm going to do 0.1, that should be plenty. You'll notice that the positions all raise 0.1. If I validate and recompute that, you'll see that all of my positions are now 0.1 higher. So now they're set up above the surface a little bit so we can get our prongs in there. They'll hold in place better. Okay. So let's do our prongs next. Go ahead and hide this sketch using the spacebar shortcut. And we'll do a prong. Okay. So for prongs, I like to start with a specific little prong. I use the same parameters, and then I can always adjust it from there if they need to be wider, thicker, longer, whatever we want to do. So I always start with 0, 0, 0, keep it perfectly centered. And the diameter, I always start with like a 0.6 or so. The height, we can do 0.75, and we'll do a round. We'll do this for a production piece instead of and we want little beads and not actual full prongs here, since it's a pave. So that's going to be my go-to. Now I can keep this value. So next time I build a prong, I don't have to type that same number, because I do like to use that as my go-to all the time. So don't forget you have that new keep last field values as default. So that's just going to keep these settings the next time I build a prong. You'll find that's been added to most of the tools in the program now. Validate that. Okay. Oh, and I made a little mistake here. If I look here in my history, I have the sketch selected. When I was hiding it, I selected instead of just hit it. So it's pulling the reference from the OXZ that I had selected. So we'll go back in here and fix that. I don't want to reference the sketch for my plane. I want to reference my OXY. Bring that back now that we're done with the other ones. Okay, so that is fixed. Now we got my little prong. We need to get the prong in there. There's two ways to do that. We do have a tool called Pave Prongs. Sometimes it works out really good. It fills it in, you're happy with it, good to go. I'll show you that first. Sometimes I spend more time kind of fixing it. Sometimes it doesn't give me all the prongs I want on the ends. Sometimes it's not the pattern that I want. So we'll try it out. All you need is the prong selected and a position selected. I can just choose my jeweling here because the positions are built into that. It's part of its history. So down here in the prong section next to where we built the prong, we could do Pave Prongs. And we get a really nice pattern. I'm okay with that. I don't think I like that they're kind of in between here and not out towards the edge. These stones aren't really secure. This would be great if these were down inside set like a channel. I'd be okay with those. I don't have anything holding the corners here. So you can see it's really difficult to calculate outside of that initial pattern. And if you're doing any kind of manual pave that's not a clean pattern, they're definitely not going to give you this clean, grid here that it's going to figure out. So I'm not going to use those. I'll show you really quickly. We can create our own positions by just adding another pave to our tree here. So we're going to do a save again, just in case, and select the ring, do another advanced pave. Now for this setup, I don't need any collisions or frontiers. Their prongs aren't going to be touching each other anywhere, so I don't have to worry about setting up that spacing between them. So we can skip that. I do want the symmetry because we already got a symmetrical pattern to fill in for the prongs as well. So we'll just go ahead and add a planar symmetry and add the OXZ and the OYZ to the list again. Kind of zoom in to where I want to work. And we're ready to do our prongs. So I'm going to do a custom diameter, so I can type in the millimeters here. And let's start with that 0.6. I think those look pretty good. We'll have to see. I'm going to go into add, and we'll start clicking in our prongs. So probably go a little bit wider with my prongs. So I could delete these and start over. If I go into the edit mode, I can select these. Remember, you can now control select them and add them to the selection. And I'm just going to go ahead and change them all at the same time. So you can imagine if I'd done all of them and then realized I didn't want that size, you can now scale all of them at one time. So that a new selection makes things easier for not just the Z height, but every edit you can do. So very convenient. So now I'm ready to add more. I think I'm happier with the 0.7 here. So we'll go plus here. And the 0.7 is already selected. So the next one I add will also be 0.7. And just for time's sake, I'm just quickly pop these in here. You can obviously spend a little time lining them up nice and clean. With that symmetry on, it goes pretty quickly. Now I can work on the ends here. Now that I can control where the positions are going to be, we can really decide how we're going to set this. So I can put my extra prongs out here as needed. Okay, I'm happy with that pattern. I'm going to go ahead and validate that. And we're going to select our prong and our positions, the list of positions. That's the pave number 2. And we'll just jewel those in place as well. So now we've got our prongs. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind with prongs is the same idea that we did with the stones. The Z level at 0 is the bottom, that flat part of the prong. If you leave that at 0 and we're putting it on this kind of rounded surface, we don't have a very good overlap, very good connection. So you might run into Boolean problems. You might run into the fact that they didn't connect at all, and you go to print them and all your prongs are gone. They didn't show up. So we need to bring those down too. They're all a little high anyway. So again, we can do that in the original prong that I built, or we can do that in the pave. I'm going to go in the jeweling number 2, back in my pave. I'm going to do a select all again, and we're just going to bring this down a couple tenths of a millimeter here, we can always recalculate and see how that looks. And there we go. Much happier with that. Okay. And then, of course, before we move on to the next detail, we're going to cut our seats for our stones. Remember, the pave is just adding the positions. The jeweling is just adding the stones. We still need to create the seats. And we're going to go ahead and select all of the stones and do a multi-cutter. So you have the old school regular cutter where you would jewel that in. With multi-cutter, it's going to do all of them at once. Helps it set it up much easier. Plus, you have a lot more options in the multi-cutter for different shapes and things you want to do. So go ahead and click that. And we'll freeze this ring. Okay. You can see you're working on all of them at the same time. You do get a display of all of them, the little green edges. Right now it's working from the middle stone as its default. Don't forget you can change that to a different position. So by just selecting it here on the screen, that moves my handles and things over here to the corner where I can see a little clearer. We'll go, we've already selected the stones, so we'll go to our top part and using our 3D hotspot here, flip right over to it. Okay, so that doesn't give me the angle I want. The cool thing about this little shortcut for the view, if you click it, it's going to flip it around that position so you get to where you can see a little clearer. That's a little better. Okay, so we're going to adjust all over different settings for the top part of our cutter. I don't usually have to change this one too much. I'm kind of happy where it is. I don't think the seat needs to be this long, so I'm going to bring up the bottom of the seat to a little more appropriate level. And then I like to open up the pavilion just a hair so that it's not going to be so tight when you're setting it. It's not going to sit on there. Plus, with your cleaning behind the stones, you're leaving a little tiny gap there. So that helps out a lot. So when I'm doing standard round cutters like this, I don't need to adjust the bottom shapes. I'm not going to do any fancy patterns on the opposite side. Those are the only two things you really have to adjust. The top height is plenty as long as it's outside of the surface of your ring. You don't need to bend over the top part here to create the angle cutter, since we're not going to be cutting into any claws or anything. So that's really all we have to do. Go ahead and validate that. So we got everything for our pave. We can cut these out and add everything that we need. So I'm going to find my sweeping here, show that. Okay. And then the Boolean operation, pretty basic. We're going to select the ring since that's the part we're keeping, and the cutters, that's the part we're cutting away. I have a Boolean shortcut in my quick access toolbar, my favorites bar up here, so I don't have to go back over to the other bench. We'll do our subtraction and validate. You can see cutters usually cut pretty clean, pretty quickly. They're not overlapping each other. Don't have any weird edges that's going to get in the way. Should be pretty quick. All right, so pave is done. Now we get to something new for most of you, something a little more fun. We're going to add that little detail to the side of our bands. And to do that, we're going to use retopology in 3Shaper. So that's the part that may be new for a lot of you guys. So I'm going to go ahead. I haven't added my prongs yet, and I just want to keep everything as simple as possible for the calculations of my retopology. So I'm going to leave those prongs out of there for now. Don't forget to add them later. So I've already saved. I'm going to go into 3Shaper. Now, when I go into 3Shaper, I don't want to convert any of these objects I've built into 3Shaper objects. We're going to be building something clean, fresh, new Shaper object. So if you're not sure that you've got everything deselected, you can click on Root one time. That deselects everything. So you can see here, if I've got a bunch of stuff selected, click on Root. That's how you can deselect everything in the tree. Careful not to double click that. That'll take you back to your home screen. And you might get stuck in the home screen if you've ever opened up a file and you see your ring in the background and the home's on top of it. That might have been what happened, or it might happen when you saved it outside of the project. So be very careful there. Just click it once to deselect everything. So with everything deselected, I can go into my modeling module. That's 3Shaper. That's going to add a blank model to the tree. Here's normally where you would start with a primitive shape, a 3D shape, or a 2D shape, and start building your model. I'm going to use retopology instead. So retopology you're going to find in the shaping section, the next to last tool next to the brushes tool. If you don't see this icon, you may not have retopology. If you bought 3Shaper V1 and just upgraded to regular V2 at the time, or you never bought the retopology add-on. It used to be sold as a separate add-on, so you may never have purchased it. So if you're missing the icon, give your salesperson a call. Check with them. They can check your records and let you know how you can add that if you never have purchased it. I recommend it. It's a great tool, not very expensive. Basically what it allows us to do is create meshes based on other objects. You can import STLs into your 3DESIGN and then create a mesh on top of it. So if you're recreating a design that you don't have a VTF for, you can do this on surfaces, you can do it on curves, or you can do it on objects we've made over in 3DESIGN. So like we've done here. I want to create something that matches the surface of this ring. So click on Retopo. Okay, and the support object by default is a plane here. So we can configure the plane size and just draw something flat. In this case, though, we want to use an object. So I'm going to switch over to the solid mode, click an object, and you have to open up the little settings menu before you can add your solid. So pull that menu down, and you see your list of solids. You can do more than one, but we're just going to add the ring as our anchor item. Everything's going to snap to that. Okay. So the way this tool works is now when we, instead of starting with a solid figure or even a flat figure, we're going to draw the mesh directly on this surface. So we'd start with drawing a square. Go flat here so I can start to even this out as I'm going. Okay, so I can continue to draw just by connect the dots here. Go over to the corner, and as you connect the dots, it's going to fill in the next square. So you can definitely do it that way and just draw everything one square at a time, but you may want to edit these. So we're going to switch modes again. So similar to how we just did in the Pave, you've got two different modes, basically, if you think of it that way. We've got our add faces mode where you're just going to click and add faces. Hit spacebar to turn that back off. And your edit mode or move mode where you can edit those that you've already drawn. So if we want to come in here and clean up any mistakes we might have made, we can do so. Now, the other cool thing you can do in edit mode here, though, is we can copy faces. It's going to make things a little quicker for us. So what you're going to do is hold down Control as you're moving either the edges of the points. I recommend not doing it with the points, but with the edges. Hold down Control. I'm going to move this edge over here, and you can see it's copying it as it moves it. So just like that, we get our design. Okay. Now, the other cool trick what you can do is this is going to be a symmetrical piece that I'm putting on here. So I want the other side to fill in as well. We can go back and add a mirror. So let me go ahead and just continue working on this half. Now I want to move these three down and copy them at the same time. So I can hold Control and move one, and then this one I got to pull from the corner instead of the edge, so we get the opposite corner. So I could do it that way. Just kind of clean this up. And that's the cool thing about copying in this mode is I don't have to switch back and forth between modes. You just let go of Control and you can go right into editing. So we got another row. Now another cool trick I can do to make things faster is I want to move the whole row at one time. You have this option here at the top. It says move edge loop. It's going to move the entire edge loop. So if I move it, it's going to move the two next to it as well. But it also works with copy. So I'm going to hold Control to copy that as I move it. And we can make that new section really quickly. And that's as far down as I want to go. So we've got the first half here. Let's go ahead and do our mirror. So to do mirroring in 3Shaper, that is a parametric tool. It's a tool built in between the 3Shaper engine and the regular 3DESIGN CAD engine. So we do these cool tricks. Symmetry is a very basic one, but it's one of the most fun. We can just hit exit, just like you exit a sketch or any other of your modules to get back to 3DESIGN, you hit the exit button. Now, when you do that in 3Shaper, we're not going back to 3DESIGN quite yet. We have this history tools, this parametric tools submenu in between. And this is where you're going to add your mirror. Let me freeze my ring so I can see my surface there again. We're going to do a mirror. And when we add this mirror, if we look at our model in the tree here, we're going to keep the source shape. We want to weld the two pieces back together. So I'm gonna turn that on so it welds, and then we want to click the correct plane. Right now you see it's mirroring to the opposite side of the ring over there. I want to do the OYZ again in this case. I'm sorry, no. That was the OYZ, the OXZ in this case. There we go, for that back half. Okay, so you can see it's mirroring it, and we got two different surface grids here, and they're not quite linked together yet. We turn on the weld option, and when we validate that, it's going to weld those two pieces back together. Okay, so again, I didn't line them up to that center line very well, so we got a little overlap. So, but no problem. The cool thing is we can edit the original surface, the first half that I was creating. So if I do anything else, remember, 3Shaper history is linear. So whatever we add in here, you can't go back too many steps. It's not going to update everything in between. So be very careful with that. But I can edit the step before the one I just did. So I have mirror here. I can edit the original surface half here. So I'm gonna double click back into that original edit surface. And now that I have my mirroring on, let me go back to retopology. Now that my mirroring on, snapping again is automatic. So I can fix these seams down the middle so that they do snap and weld back together once I exit out of here. So we clean up our grid as needed. And now I can work on that shape that I want, where it's going to come up around my pave. Something like that. And I want the same thing on the bottom side. Something like that. Okay. So now when we exit, that mirror is going to re-mirror. It's going to re-weld everything back together. Okay. Now I've got something off here. We need to fix that. Let me go back in my edit service. Okay. That point and that point, make sure those are snapped so they weld back cleanly. There we go. You can see after the mirror, it's mirroring it. The weld is built into the mirror, so it's welding it back together so we don't have that gap between the two. Got everything lined up. It'll give us a nice smooth transition where we want it. We're good to go. Okay, so we have a surface that we've used retopology. We've placed retopology surface on top of this surface, or the surface of a ring, and we need to add some thickness to it. So I want to do that on the entire mesh and not just the edit surface that we did originally, the half. So what we can do is in the properties, we tell it we want to do a new edit surface on top of the mirror. So to be sure that it goes on top of the mirror, I like to select the mirror, just single click it. We don't need to edit it, just highlight it and come over here and add a new edit surface to your tree. Okay. So it won't actually show up in the tree until we're finished editing that new edit and exit out of there, but you'll see that as soon as I exit back out of here, you're going to have edit surface number 2 on top of the mirror. Once you've added this new edit surface, like I was saying before, don't go back and change the original. There is no parametric link between those surfaces. It'd be almost impossible to figure out how to connect those things. So don't edit this one anymore. Make sure you're finished with this one. We can always remove a edit if we need to go backwards. But you have to destroy the original or the top one to go back. So it is a linear history. Don't skip around like you do over in 3DESIGN. Okay, so now that we've added this new edit surface, you can see it's back to being one full mesh. This is after the mirror has taken place, and it's a completely new edit surface version of the whole mesh. So I'm going to do a double click here. I'll select all. You can do that up here in the menu as well, but double click is the shortcut. Select that entire surface, and we want to give this thickness. Now you could do an extrusion like you would think to do over in 3DESIGN. You want to bring this out and extrude it out. The problem with extrusion is there's no caps on the back side. So we're moving the surface and creating a new row of geometry in between. That doesn't quite work the way we want. What you want to do in 3Shaper to add thickness to a surface is to do a shell. So similar to how you would do in 3DESIGN, a shell is basically offsetting the surface a certain amount I'm gonna do, how thick do we want this? Maybe millimeters. Let's just see what that looks like. That's a little high. Okay, so we're gonna undo that. And we'll just do a new shell. Again, we don't have that parametric history here, so we have to undo when we trying things out. Do maybe a 0.5 millimeter. I'll take that. There we go. I'm happy with that thickness. Okay. So you can see what it's doing is offsetting that surface and then filling it in. So instead of just moving the surface like the extrude does, it's keeping the original surface, offsetting a certain amount, and then filling in a new row of faces in between. So that's what we want. Now I want to make sure that this piece is inside my ring. Right now, that inner surface is basically matching the surface that I drew it on since we use retopology. So I'm gonna select the entire back faces. To do that, I'm gonna select one corner, use my face loop tool. That way I can select quickly these faces here. And then I could do the entire row down. That way I don't have to control click each one of those. So that's your face loop selection. Very helpful when you're selecting a whole pattern or group of faces. Okay, so with those selected, now I'm going to do my extrusion. Since I already have the surface back there, we can just pull this in, creating a new row of faces and having that inside my ring. So now that it's already a solid thick piece, we can now use our extrude. So that's pretty much done. I want to soften maybe some edges here. When we do your shelling, it by default gives you hard edges. I'm happy with the hard edges on the inside, but I want to soften the inside here. Go in my edit tool. We're going to take a look at the edges. So I'll switch over to edge selection mode. You can see all these edges on the inside, these red edges, are sharp. So I'm just going to do a select all sharp edges. We'll just get rid of all of them at once by clicking on create sharp edges. So when you click create sharp edges on sharp edges, it does the opposite. It removes the sharp edges. And you can see that's going to round it off. Okay. So meshes are soft by default. If there's no sharp edges, you're going to have very soft corners, just like a NURBS curve. When you're doing NURBS curves, you have those corners that are smooth and soft. That's because we don't have any hard points in there. Same idea here. It's a little too rounded, too soft. I want to maybe control that corner a little bit. So just like I would on NURBS curve, we can put 3 points closer together. In that case, what we're doing is filleting. So I'm going to take this edge and double click it. And I'm going to select this edge with control and double click it. And the same thing with this edge and the one back here. So I want that whole edge selected each side. And we're going to add a fillet. Okay, so fillet or chamfer, we can call it chamfer here, same idea. With that edge selected, you can see the little dotted lines. Basically, it's going to subdivide these faces on either side. It's like putting 3 points really close together, but these are edges. I'm going to do a really tight fillet or chamfer here. I'm going to do a 0.2. See how that looks. If there were any sharp edges, I could have used this to remove the sharp edges. It's by default, we'll remove those. Adding a bevel, or the difference between chamfer and kind of a fillet here would be this add bevel option. Chamfer is going to take away the original, the one I have selected, this blue edge here, create 2 new edges. So we get kind of more like a fillet. If we add bevel, or more like a chamfer, if we add bevel, it's going to keep the one on the inside and then add the 2 next to it. So you get more of a harder edge there. Still all soft edges, but we get more of a hard edge geometry. We get nice corners instead of that kind of balloony bubble effect. Just the default. So happy with our shape. That's good to go. Going to exit out of the 3Shaper tools. Going to exit out of the history tools. Now we're back in 3Design. It's all instant. You don't have to wait for it to convert it. It's just all quickly. This is now a regular 3Design solid. We can work on it just like anything else. Okay, so we need the one for the other side. Before we do that though, I want to bring my ring back. I'm going to do a Boolean here, so I'm going to save that. So what I want to do is I want to cut away this shape as well as keeping it, because if we want to cast this in a different metal, it's inside the ring. So if we were to cast it as is, there's no spot for this to sit. It would not fit back into the ring. So what we're going to do is I'm going to clone this. So in the duplicate section, we're just going to do a clone. I'm not going to move it. I'm going to leave it exactly where it is. There we go. And I'm going to hide my original model so we can work from the clone. So I got my clone. I'm going to go ahead and mirror that. Okay, save there. We're going to do a subtraction. So we're going to subtract these two clone pieces from the ring. And now we've got a spot where when we cast that separate little piece, it's going to be able to fit back into the ring. You may even scale that up a little bit if you want to give yourself a little room, or you can leave it as is. So you're, when you're fabricating the ring or putting the ring together, you can do that by hand and just kind of clean that out if it's not fitting in it as a glove or like a puzzle like it should. Up to you. You have to kind of play around with how much shrinkage you have in your casting processes. So we got our two cutouts. We can bring back the original model here. I'm going to add a different color there so we know that's going to be cast separate. Go ahead to add material, set material. We'll do white gold there. And we just mirror that for the other side. Now we've got our two separate pieces. Okay. So to finish up this design today, show you how we can add maybe some texture at the bottom. I don't want to use the texture tool. I want to use not retop, but we're going to use a 3Shaper mesh again. We're going to unwrap the bottom. So let's save here. So if we look at our topology again, because of those extra steps we did, we have a nice clean surface on the outside here that stops right in the inside edge of the ring. But I don't want to unwrap this entire surface. It does all one surface except for the inside. I don't need any of this up here. So another way I can control that is a temporarily cut of the ring. So I'm going to take this ring and cut it in half. Okay, so that's going to be the cut and delete tool. Let's change the cutting type to along the Z, so it's in this direction. And I'm going to keep the bottom half of my ring. Now, don't worry, we have parametric history. That full ring is still in here in the tree somewhere. We haven't destroyed the top half of our ring. I just want to cut in half, so now I can copy this face just for the bottom half of the ring. There's my copy face. Now what I can do is undo the history of our cut and delete, bringing back our full ring. And now we've got our unwrapped surface, just the bottom half of the ring. It's going to help me line things up a little better. And actually, I probably don't want to cut it directly in half here because I don't need to go that far up. My design's only going to stop right down here. So let's move that plane down a little bit. Go back into my cut and delete. Oh, I got rid of the cut and delete. It should be part of the copy faces. Here we go. Yeah. So again, fun little history tricks you can do jumping around. We got our cut and delete before we brought the other piece back. So we can move this plane down. And that way I can see where the edge is going to be a little clearer. Recompute that. Oh, my copy face broke. So this will happen from time to time because of that cut and delete change. The face that was originally there, it's not the same face anymore. Sometimes it gets switched to a different side of the ring or different part of the ring. If that ever happens, we're just going to double click back into the copy face. And oh yeah, it doesn't like that. Okay, so we're going to have to undo it. Okay. So now we've got our ring split. We're going to copy this new face. It's not liking that. Let's get rid of this cut and delete. Sometimes it's best to undo your steps. And there we go. Okay, back to a full ring. No problem. We haven't messed anything up. It just did not like me moving that plane down. So we're going to do our split again on the Z. Okay, keeping the bottom half. Now we can redo our copy face. And undo that cut and delete. There we go. That's better. That's what I want. Okay. So good to see that. Be careful with faces when it comes to history. They can get a little weird. It was still trying to reference before I cut it because of the way I undid it out of order there. So it's good for you guys to see. Sometimes it's best to undo the steps and just redo them if you need to make a change like that. Did not like that at all. Okay, so now we've got the part that I want to unwrap. So if you've not done an unwrap before, you need a surface. It needs to be a single, clean, untrimmed surface. So this is what we want. We're going to do our copy face, or sorry, not our copy face, our unwrap. So that's a deform tool. The deform section, you have UV unwrap and UV wrap. So I'm gonna unwrap that flat here. So it's taking that surface. You can see the edge of the surface here, where that design is. It's going right up to the edge of our cutout of our ring. That's what we want. And then I'm going to go ahead and center this. So by default, it moves it over here on top of the plane. I'm going to keep it center. That's going to make it easier to keep things symmetrical as I'm moving my points around. We want to validate that. And then so I can see inside here, I'm going to go ahead and hide. I can hide my surface, hide these stones. And that way I can just work on this little grid. Now, when you unwrap things, you have this grid line. This grid line you can set up how many grid lines you have. That's going to help you kind of determine where things are on your design. So you can see here, this matches with what you have here. So I want my little detail that I'm going to be adding not going over the edge. This actually worked out pretty good. I can see where the corner is. It's going to be in between these two squares. So use that as a visual guide. So now I want to create my 3-shaper mesh that we're going to be using as a kind of texture to cover that surface. So we could use retopology, but that's going to be drawing it manually. I may not get the grid nice and clean the way I want it. So in this case, I'm going to do a brand new 3-shaper mesh and just wrap it back instead of putting it on the surface. So I'm going to click on my root again, just make sure nothing's selected since I just went through and selected a bunch of stuff randomly to hide it. We're going to do a new 3-shaper mesh. Nothing selected. And I'm going to go ahead and just use a flat grid for that. And this is called a quad. It's one of the 2D shapes. So it's going to create it like so. We can subdivide this any way we want. So it's 3 by 3 by default. I think we need to match this kind of shape here. So I'm going to do let's do like 5 by 5. You don't want to give it too many faces because the more faces, that's 4 times as many points that you got to move around. So try to keep it as simple as you need, just like a NURBS curve, as simple as possible with enough points to create the shape you're creating. Okay, so this obviously can be wider. You can just use the handles here, make this wider. And I want it to stay in between those lines. So it's going to be in that area of the ring that I want. And we're going to subdivide the horizontal direction, maybe a little more than 5. That looks good. I want squares actually, so let's just keep going. It's going to be part of the pattern I decide to come up with here. So that looks good. So I'm going to go in point mode and model this a little bit. I'm going to take these corner points and move them out a little bit so we get that kind of arc shape of our cutout area. I want to move all these at once, so that would be a resize, not a move tool. So use the resize tool, and I'm just going to grab this white arrow and just pull them out a little. That's kind of the shape we're going for to match up the other piece. Is that right? No, it's the other way. I'm sorry. Backwards here. Oh, undo that. It's got to go this way to fit in there. Right, right, yeah. And do the same thing here. It's marquee and control selecting those. Just resize by moving those away from each other. And maybe these two as well, just a hair. There we go. Yeah, that's the shape I want. Okay, so this is, again, flat right now. It's just a surface. We need to thicken that up. So I'm going to go back in my face mode and do a double click to select all. We're going to do our shell first. And this one's not going to be very thick. It's going to be let's do what do we got? 0.5 millimeter for the other one. Let's do 0.15. Okay, so it sticks out a little bit. I need to do the backside just like we did on the other one. So I'll do my face selection again. Just clicking the single arrows. And we'll do our extrusion this way. This is sinking into our ring on the bottom side. We need that good connection for the Boolean operation. Okay, and now for my pattern. This is the fun part. We're going to do that face loop selection again using these single arrows. Okay, and we're going to do an extrusion again, but the cool part is we're going to do an extrusion on individual faces all at the same time. So I click on my extrusion tool, and you can see here this pocket mode. You do all the faces at once, or you can split the faces. So if I click on that, pull up on here, you can see this cool little pattern comes up. Each face gets extruded. Okay, so that's going to be my texture. I'm keeping it very simple here, but these nice little grids. We can always play around with how we design, especially with retopology, these shapes in here, and you can do other kinds of patterns and things. So happy with that. Do I need to round it at all? I think I'm happy with this one being more sharp. We'll leave it sharp on the corners. And now we're ready to wrap it all back up together. So now this is based on where it's sitting here. So I've got the part where it was flat on the surface, and we got the part that we extruded or shelled up and the extrusion out, and then we have the part going down below the surface. So how it lays out here in between this pattern is kind of how it goes back to the piece of the ring. So you just select this mesh, and because this is a mesh, we're not going to have the same kind of deform problems we would have if this was a very complex regular object. So just select those. And we're going to do the opposite of unwrap, which is wrap. So UV wrap. And we can see it's laying out that surface, wrapping it back to that grid, exactly where we want it. And watch how quickly it'll calculate because this is a mesh, almost instant. So definitely learn a little bit of your 3Shaper tools. You can do some really cool stuff, especially with the retopology and creating some simple patterns and things on the surface of your rings. Now we can bring everything back and put it all together, and we'll finish and give you guys time for a Q&A session here. So where is everything? We've got our jeweling, our prongs. You can see I'm bad at labeling things. Label things. Here's our mirror. Here's our main Boolean. I can turn off this topology display now. And set material was the other half. Okay, I'm going to hide my unwrap. We don't need that grid anymore. And we can hide that copy face. Those are part of the history of the wrap that we did, so we can actually delete those if you're really cleaning up your tree. They don't need to be there anymore. But I'll just hide them for now in case I want to go back and edit them later. And we just have one more step, and that's going to put our little pattern, our little texture we made onto the rest of the ring. Okay. Booleans nicely. Cool thing is we can still edit this. So if I want to go back in and maybe match this shape a little more, change the pattern up, just undo the Boolean. I recommend that before you do that so that when you recompute the history, it doesn't take as long to recalculate. And then just go back into our model number 2 here. just part of the unwrap now. Or sorry, part of the wrap. Part of this Boolean. Somewhere down here. Oh, there it is. The UV wrap here. There's our model. Just remember to edit the original surface, make your changes, and then you can recalculate all that history. So that's our design for today. Like I said, nothing too fancy, but some really cool advanced tricks for you guys if you haven't seen those kind of things yet. Some good advice on paying attention to how your topology of your 3DESIGN objects are is based on how you draw the curves, where the start points are, where the sharp edges are.